My husband said he was working late every night. Until one unexpected call exposed a secret involving my sister that I can't unsee. He texted me at 6:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. Working late again. Don't wait up. I put my phone down and finished making dinner and ate it alone at the kitchen table. I had been eating dinner alone a lot. 4, maybe 5 nights a week for the past 2 months. He was a project manager at a construction firm. Projects ran late. Deadlines were real. I understood. Or I told myself I understood. The thing about a lie that is told to someone who trusts you is that the trust does the lying's work for you. I didn't question the late nights because I trusted my husband. I didn't look more closely at the pattern because I trusted him. The trust was the mechanism. He knew that. He relied on it. My name is Amara. I'm 33. My husband's name is David. He's 36. And the unexpected call happened on a Thursday evening when I answered his phone because mine was charging in the bedroom and I was closer to his, and the caller was listed in his contacts as Jake from work. It was not Jake from work. My sister's name is Priya. She's 30. 3 years younger than me. I want to tell you who Priya is before I tell you what she did because I think it matters. She is the sister who borrowed money twice and paid it back both times. The sister who showed up when my father was sick without being asked. The sister who knew when I was having a hard time without me saying anything and called at exactly the right moment. Or I thought she knew. I thought she paid attention because she loved me. I understand now that she was paying attention in a different way than I thought. David and Priya had met the year before David and I got married. They had always gotten along. He was easy with her in the way that good husbands are easy with the family they marry into. She was comfortable around him in the way that sisters-in-law are comfortable when the marriage is good. Or that's how I read it. I read everything wrong. The call. I answered because it was on the kitchen counter, and I was 2 feet away and my hands were already moving toward it before I thought about it. I said, "Hello, David's phone." The voice on the other end was my sister's voice. Not the voice of Jake from work. Priya's voice. She said, "Oh, Amara. I was calling for." She stopped. I said, "You were calling for David." She said, I had a question about." She stopped again. I said, "Priya." Silence. I said, "I'm going to need you to not say anything right now." She said, "Amara." I said, "I mean it. Don't." I put the phone down on the counter face up. I looked at it. Her name was on the screen. Her contact photo. A picture from my wedding. She was in my wedding party. She wore a green dress. I picked the phone back up and ended the call. Then I sat down on the kitchen floor. I sat on the kitchen floor for about 20 minutes. Not crying. Not moving. Just sitting there with my back against the cabinet and David's phone in my hands and the specific stillness of a person whose brain is running a process it has never had to run before. I was not building the full picture yet. The call was 20 seconds. Priya's voice on a number saved as Jake from work. That's what I had. But I've always been good at math. And the math of my sister calling my husband's phone on a Tuesday evening when he had texted me working late was already resolving into something I didn't want to look at directly. I got up off the floor. I made tea I didn't drink. I went to bed. When David came home at 11:20, I was already in the bedroom with the light off. He moved quietly in the way that people move quietly when they think the other person is asleep. I lay there and listened to him move through the apartment, and I stayed still and I breathed evenly and I let him believe I was asleep. I was the most awake I had been in months. Thursday through Sunday. David worked late Thursday. He came home at 10:40. I was on the couch and he kissed the top of my head and asked how my day was, and I said fine and asked about his, and he talked about a project deadline for 11 minutes. I timed it. Not because I was tracking the lies specifically. Because I found myself suddenly noticing everything differently. The way he talked about work. The way he described his colleagues. The specific absence of any story that involved someone who felt like a real person. Everything he said was project language. Deadline language. Infrastructure and timeline and client language. Nothing human. That's what you sound like when you're covering. I understand that now. You talk around the humans to avoid accidentally mentioning one. Friday I called Priya. She answered on the second ring. I said, "I need you to tell me the truth. The whole truth. If you leave anything out I will find out eventually, and it will be worse than what it already is." Silence. Then she said, "How long have you known?" I said, "How long has it been happening?" Silence. She said, 4 months. 4 months. I had been eating dinner alone for 2 months and calling it project deadlines, and the actual timeline was 4 months. I said, I need you to not contact him until I've had time to figure out what I'm doing. She said, Amara, I'm so. I said, I need you to not contact him. She said, okay. I hung up. 4 months. What I did with the information. I did not call David. I did not confront him that weekend. What I did instead was think. Clearly and in order. About what I had and what I wanted and what the options were. He did not know that I knew. Priya knew that I knew. She had been told to go quiet. I had a window. I spent the weekend being normal. Saturday we went to the farmer's market the way we always do on Saturdays. I bought cheese. He carried the bag. We came home and made lunch together, and I watched him move around our kitchen, and I thought about 4 months and about a contact saved as Jake from work, and I kept my face the way my face needed to be. I am good at that. Better than I knew. Sunday I called my attorney. Not because I had decided anything permanently. Because I wanted to understand what I was dealing with before I said a word to anyone who would change the dynamic. The attorney. Her name is Clara. I had used her 3 years ago for an unrelated professional matter. She remembered me. I said, I need to understand the divorce landscape. I found out my husband has been having an affair. She said, how long has it been going on? I said, 4 months that I know of. She said, do you want to save the marriage or end it? I said, I don't know yet. I need information before I make that decision. She said, smart. We talked for an hour. She walked me through what I was entitled to. What the process looked like. What documentation was useful and how to gather it without tipping anyone off. She said, don't confront yet. Information first. I said, that's where I am. She said, one more question. Who is the affair partner? I said, my sister. Long pause. She said, I'm sorry. I said, thank you. She said, that changes some dynamics within the family. Not the legal process. But the family situation is going to be more complicated. I said, I know. She said, are you okay right now? I said, I'm functional. She said, that's the right answer for this stage. The documentation week. I spent 6 days gathering. David's phone records were not accessible to me directly. But our joint account statements were. And in 4 months of affair there had been restaurants I had never been to. A hotel charge I had seen and accepted as explanation for, a work dinner that ran long, that I now understood differently. Small things. Cash withdrawals that had been normal in pattern but were slightly higher in frequency. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would have alarmed me if I had been looking for it, which I wasn't, because I trusted him. I photographed the statements. I organized dates. I called his office on a Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. under the pretense of a question about a form we needed for taxes. I asked the reception line if David was still there. They said his office was dark. They said he'd left around 5. He texted me at 6:47 that same evening. Working late? I have that text. I have the call log showing I called the office. I have both things with their timestamps. My attorney has copies of all of it. I confronted him on Saturday. 10 days after the phone call. Not because I had run out of things to gather. Because I had gathered what I needed and I had spoken to Clara twice and I had made my decision. The decision was, I needed to hear him say it. Not for the documentation. Not for legal reasons. For me. I needed to sit across from my husband and ask him the question and hear what he said. We had coffee in the morning the way we always do on Saturdays. I waited until he had finished his. Until the morning routine was done and the apartment was quiet and we were both sitting at the kitchen table. I said, I need to ask you something and I need you to tell me the truth. He looked at me. He had that particular alertness that people have when they don't know what's coming but they know something is coming. I said, are you seeing someone? He said, Amara. I said, yes or no. He looked at the table. I said, David. Yes or no? He said, yes. I said, is it Priya? He closed his eyes. I said, is it my sister? He said, yes. I said, how long? He said, 4 months. I said, the same 4 months you've been working late. He said, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I don't know how it. I said, I'm going to need you to leave for the day. I need the apartment to myself. He said, Amara, please. Can we? I said, I'll call you when I'm ready to talk. Take your phone. He sat there for a moment. Then he got up. He went to the bedroom and got his jacket and his wallet. He came back through the kitchen and stopped at the door. He said, "I love you." I said nothing. He left. I sat at the kitchen table until the sound of the elevator had faded. Then I cried for the first time. Not until he was gone. Not until I had done what I needed to do with him in the room. After he left. That's when it was safe to fall apart. The falling apart. I cried for 2 hours. Long enough that my face swelled, and I looked like a different person in the bathroom mirror. Long enough that I ran out of the specific acute grief and arrived somewhere steadier. Then I called my mother. I want to tell you that conversation was simple. It was not simple. My mother has 2 daughters. She was going to hear from me and she was going to hear from Priya and she was going to have to figure out what to do with having both of us. I called first. Not to get there first strategically. Because she was my mother and I needed her. She answered and I said, "Mom, I need to tell you something." She said, "What's wrong?" I said, "David and Priya have been having an affair." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Oh, Amara." She said it the way that had nothing in it except my name and the weight she was already beginning to carry on my behalf. We talked for an hour. She cried. I had already cried my 2 hours, so I was dry, but I listened to her cry and helped in the way that other people's grief for your situation sometimes helps. She said, "What do you need?" I said, "I need you to know. I'm not asking you to choose sides. I know she's your daughter too." She said, "You are both my daughters." I said, "I know." She said, "But what was done to you is not something I can call anything other than what it is." I said, "I know that too." She said, "I love you." I said, "I love you too." David and I. We talked that evening when he came back. I had asked him to come home at 6. He was there at 6 exactly. We sat at the kitchen table again. The same table from the morning. I said, "I've been in contact with an attorney." His face changed. I said, "I'm not making any permanent decisions tonight. But I need you to understand what I know and what I've done with what I know." I walked him through it. The phone call. The 10 days. The statements. The call to his office. The timestamps. He listened. When I finished, he said, "I've been lying to you for 4 months and you've known for 10 days and you didn't say anything." I said, "I needed the full picture before I said anything." He said, "I didn't think you knew." I said, "I know." He said, "Amara, I'm sorry. I know that's not enough. I know you don't want to hear it right now. But I need to say it." I said, "I hear you." He said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I want to take 2 weeks. I don't want any contact between you and Priya during those 2 weeks. After 2 weeks I'll tell you what I've decided." He said, "And if I want to try to save?" I said, 2 weeks. Then we'll talk about what's possible." He nodded. He said, "I'll do whatever you need." I said, "I know you will. Right now that's not a comfort. Eventually it might be." Priya. I had not spoken to Priya since the Friday call where I told her not to contact him. 11 days of silence. On day 12 she texted. Said she knew I probably didn't want to hear from her. Said she wasn't going to say she was sorry because sorry wasn't the right size for what happened. Said she had been thinking about everything since I called and she wanted me to know she wasn't going to try to explain it in a way that made it less than what it was. I read that text 4 times. It was honest. That was the thing that made it complicated. It was honest in a way that was harder to be angry at than if she had tried to minimize. She didn't try to minimize. I texted back, "I'm not ready to talk yet. I'll reach out when I am." She said, "Okay." She has not texted again. That's where we are. The 2 weeks. I want to tell you what I decided at the end of 2 weeks. The decision took the full 2 weeks. I thought about it every day from multiple angles. What the marriage had been before 4 months ago. What it was during 4 months ago. What kind of person my husband had been for the 6 years before and what that means weighed against the 4 months. I thought about my sister. 3 years of being her sister as adults. The loans paid back. The showing up when my father was sick. The calls at the right moments. What that history means weighed against 4 months. I don't have a clean answer. Here is what I have. I told David the first wanted to try. Not because I'm certain it works. Because the 6 years before were real and I'm not willing to end them without giving the trying a fair attempt. We're in couples therapy. We go Thursdays. It is uncomfortable and honest, and the therapist asks questions neither of us enjoys answering. I told Priya that I needed more time before I could see her. She said she understood. We have not seen each other. We have exchanged 3 texts. She is waiting. I don't know when I'll be ready for the conversation that has to happen eventually. My mother checks in on me every Sunday. She does not report on Priya and she does not ask me to be ready faster than I am. She just asks how I am and listens to the honest answer. That's where things stand. What the unexpected call actually was. I've been thinking about this. What the call was and what it did and why it happened the way it happened. Priya had saved David's number under her own name in her phone. She had his real contact. She called it. He had saved Priya's number under Jake from work in his phone. The specific asymmetry of that. She had his real name because she was using her own phone to call her own contact and there was no need for a cover. He had her under a work colleague's name because someone might see his screen. Because he was managing visibility. Because he was in a marriage he was hiding something from. She called his phone. I answered. She heard my voice and knew immediately. He did not know any of it happened until I told him 11 days later. That's the unexpected call. Priya calling the number she had for my husband. Me answering the phone I picked up without thinking. Her voice coming out of the speaker of a phone saved as Jake from work. 20 seconds. That's all it took. 20 seconds and 11 days of quiet preparation. What I know now? I know that trust is not passive. That's the thing I keep returning to. I gave my trust to my husband and to my sister and I assumed the trust was doing the work of a marriage and a sisterhood. I assumed that because the trust was there the relationship was intact. Trust doesn't do the work. People do the work. Trust is what you extend while they do it. When they stop doing the work the trust is just sitting there extended into empty air and you don't know until something unexpected happens. A phone call you answer without thinking. A name saved under someone else's name. A voice you recognize saying the name of the person it wasn't calling for. I know that I handled the 10 days well. Not because I want credit for it. Because it's true and it matters. I gathered information. I contacted an attorney. I made decisions in the right order. I didn't give anyone the opportunity to manage what I knew before I knew enough to protect it. I know that my marriage is uncertain and my relationship with my sister is uncertain and none of that resolves on a timeline I can control. I know that Thursday nights are hard. The couple's therapy days. We sit in an office and say true things to each other and the therapist writes notes and asks questions and we drive home mostly quiet and make dinner mostly quiet and by the time we go to bed something has usually shifted slightly. Not better exactly. More honest? I'm building on honest. That's the only foundation I trust right now. Honest and the information I gathered and the attorney who has copies of everything. That's what I have. That's where I'm building from. My mother asked me last Sunday if I thought things were going to be okay. I said, I don't know yet. She said, that's the honest answer. I said, I'm only giving honest answers right now. She said, I know. I can tell. She said, I think you're going to be okay regardless of how it resolves. I said, why? She said, because you found out and you sat on the kitchen floor for 20 minutes and then you got up. That's who you are. You sit with it and then you get up. She said, some people don't get up. You always get up. I said, I always get up. She said, that's everything. Maybe she's right. I sat on the kitchen floor for 20 minutes with the phone in my hands and the math resolving into something I didn't want to look at directly. Then I got up. Made tea I didn't drink. Went to bed. Started gathering. 10 days. And then I sat at the kitchen table and asked the question and heard the answer and asked him to leave and cried when the elevator sound had faded. Then I got up from that too. I always get up. That's everything. That's the only thing I know for certain right now. And right now, that's enough. The farmer's market Saturday. I keep thinking about that Saturday. The one in the middle of the 10 days when we went to the farmer's market and bought cheese and he carried the bag and we came home and made lunch. I was completely aware of everything. The way he walked next to me. The way he picked up a jar of something and read the label and put it back. The way he laughed at something the vendor said. The way he reached for my hand at one point and I let him take it. I let him take my hand. Because letting go would have changed something and I wasn't ready for things to change yet. That's the part that cost me something. The performance of normalcy during the 10 days. Eating together. Sleeping in the same bed. Having conversations about nothing. Letting him take my hand at the farmer's market. I needed the 10 days to be what they were. Clean. Prepared. Undisturbed. So I performed. He never knew. He thought those 10 days were 10 regular days. He came home from working late and found me already in bed and thought I was asleep. He made lunch on Saturday and thought it was an ordinary Saturday. He did not know he was living inside the 10 days. I think about that sometimes. How a person can be entirely inside a situation that has already been named and categorized and prepared for by the other person. How you can be eating lunch and thinking it's just lunch when the other person at the table knows exactly what it is. That's what trust costs you when it's used against you. You stop being able to tell what's real. He did that to me for 4 months. I did it to him for 10 days. I'm not saying those are equivalent. They are not equivalent. I'm saying I understood something about what it feels like to be in a situation you're not aware you're in. David's version. He told me his version in therapy. Week 3. The therapist asked him to describe how it started and he talked for about 12 minutes. I listened. I'm not going to relay his version to you because it belongs to the therapy room and not to this. What I will tell you is that I listened to it and at the end of it I still didn't have the answer to the question I keep asking, which is, how? Not how did it start. I understand the mechanics of how. People are around each other. Things shift. Decisions get made in the wrong direction. How is in, how do you eat dinner with your wife and ask about her day? How do you carry the bag at the farmer's market? How do you text working late and then go somewhere else? How do you do that for 4 months and come home and look at the person in the face? He said, I don't have a good answer for that. The therapist said, that's honest. He said, I know it's not enough. The therapist said, it doesn't have to be enough right now. It has to be honest. We sat in that office on a Thursday evening and I looked at my husband and I thought, I don't know who you are. Not in a dramatic way. In the specific way of someone who realizes the picture they have of a person is missing something important. Not that they're a stranger. That they're less known than you thought. I'm getting to know him again. The actual version. The one that includes the 4 months and what the 4 months say about him. It's uncomfortable. It's also more honest than what came before. Priya and my mother. My mother navigates this the way she navigates everything difficult, which is with a specific kind of practical love that doesn't require understanding the thing to keep loving the people inside it. She calls Priya too. I know this. I've told her she doesn't need to report on those conversations. She doesn't. She keeps us separate. She is the kind of mother who can love both daughters without making either of them feel like the loving of one is a betrayal of the other. I am grateful for that. Some families fracture along these lines. The mother picks. The relatives pick. The holidays become impossible. I'm not naive enough to think none of that is coming. It probably is, to some degree. But my mother is not picking right now. She is loving both of us and keeping both conversations separate and calling me on Sundays and probably calling Priya on some other day and not telling either of us what the other one said. That's the right call. I told her I thought so. She said, I'm their mother. That's all I know how to be. The green dress. Priya wore green at my wedding. I mentioned that earlier and I keep coming back to it. She was in the wedding party. She stood up there with me. She gave a toast at the reception that made people laugh and then made people cry, and that ended with her saying she had never seen me more myself than I was on that day. I had never seen her more herself, I thought. Now I'm not sure what herself means. The green dress is in a photo on our wall. In the photo, Priya is laughing at something I said and her head is slightly back and she looks genuinely happy, and the green dress is exactly right for that day and the photograph is exactly what a wedding photograph should be. I've walked past it every day. I haven't taken it down. Not because I've forgiven everything. Because taking it down feels like deciding something I'm not ready to decide. That photograph is a real moment. Whatever came after doesn't make the moment in the photograph untrue. She was there. She was laughing. She wore green. Those things happened. I'm leaving the photograph up until I know what I want to do with everything it contains. Clara. My attorney checks in every 2 weeks. A brief call. Confirms I haven't made any decisions I haven't told her about. Confirms I know what my options are if things move in a different direction. She said on our last call, how are the Thursdays going? I said, hard. Honest. I think that's the right combination. She said, in my experience, the couples who make it through something like this are the ones who can sustain being honest when it's hard. A lot of people can be honest when it's easy. I said, we're finding out if we're the kind who can sustain it. She said, that's the right way to frame it. She said, and if you're not? I said, then I'll know. And I'll call you. She said, I'll be here. That's the 2-track thing I'm doing right now. Trying to build something honest in the marriage while also knowing what the exit looks like if honest isn't enough. Clara called that pragmatic. I call it having gathered the information in advance. The 10 days taught me something. Information is not betrayal. Knowing your options is not giving up. You can be fully invested in an attempt and also know exactly what happens if the attempt doesn't work. That's not hedging. That's being the kind of person who gets up off the kitchen floor. I'm that kind of person. I've always been that kind of person. I just didn't know it until a phone rang on a Thursday and I answered it without thinking and heard my sister's voice. 20 seconds. Everything after that has been mine to decide. I'm still deciding. I'm still in it. That's where I am.